All right. Am I live now? I'm live. All right. Good morning, everyone. I hope that you're all tuning in right about now. Thank you so much for joining Hope today as we start or continue our series and discuss today going beyond allyship, how to be anti-racist in your daily life series with joining us today, the incredible Denea Joseph. My name is Stephanie Ramirez Zarate. I am a program manager at Hope, and I will be moderating this conversation with Denea today. For those of you who are unfamiliar with us, Hope is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that empowers our communities through advocacy, Latina leadership trainings, and increasing knowledge on the contributions that Latinas have made to advance the status of women for the past 30 years. This short but impactful event is part of Hope's commitment to standing with the Black Lives Matter movement and to challenging racist systems and structural inequities that have been laid bare by the COVID-19 pandemic this year. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Walmart, for supporting our Hope Against Racism conversation series. Please feel free to share this Facebook Live with your network, and note that our recording will be posted on our Facebook page. I also want to encourage everyone to tune in to our website where you can also find all the recordings and copies of our previous Hope events against racism conversations that we have hosted. So you can check that out on latinas.org. All right, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest today, Denea Joseph. Denea's gonna be popping up pretty soon here. Hi, Denea.
Hi, Stephanie.
So just personal note here, I want to give a shout out to the Bruins. Denea and I are both Bruins, and we've crossed paths through the halls of UCLA. So I'm super thankful to be connecting with you through this platform, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to give you a warm welcome and introduction, and then we can dive right into our content for today. So Denea Joseph is an undocumented Black DACA recipient and national immigrant rights activist. She immigrated to the United States at the age of 7 years old from Belize, Central California. Denea is regularly sought after media commentator on immigration issues and has been vocal about her undocumented status and Black experience in this country. Denea has been serving as the vice president for the Black Los Angeles Young Democrats, California ambassador for the United States of Women, and most recently worked as the communications coordinator for the Undocumented Black Network, UBN. Denea, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. Again, I'm really excited to have you here with us today and engage with our Hope audience. And on a personal note, just connect with you again.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephanie, and to Jennifer and Maya and everybody who played a role in making this event happen. It's an honor.
Thanks so much, Denea. So let's get started. Kind of just wanted to frame the conversation. We've been having these conversations in response to the civil rights uprise that we've been seeing since the summer. We've been having them in different contexts, and as we're heading into the holidays, Thanksgiving around the corner, Christmas, and then the New Year's, we're going to be seeing family, seeing friends in a safe way, I hope. Everyone keeping your safe distance. But this is why we wanted to just have this conversation. How do we start preparing to be with friends and family, also post-election? And really bringing us back to these lens of the work continues, and for all of us that are wanting to do anti-racist work, we need to do it every day. And so that's the context that we want to just have this conversation with you. And so if you're okay, we can get started with our first question.
Yes.
So Denea, what have been your experiences within the immigrant rights community, and how do they inform and influence your work in anti-racism?
So I started actually working toward immigrant rights during my undergraduate career at UCLA. And the reason that I started to do that was because I felt for so long that there wasn't really any space for me as an undocumented and Black woman at the intersections. Whenever I would hear immigration being spoken about, I never saw anyone who looked like me, right? And even when I didn't see faces that looked like mine, there was never any conversation that it's not just me that's within these spaces, right? That immigration impacts people of all different races and ethnicities and coming from various countries of origins. I never heard that. And really, it was my junior year of high school where my counselor said that if we don't know, because I'd never been open about my undocumented identity. And when she said that, it was like an epiphany for me. Like, if no one else will speak about this, then I literally have no choice. Because if I don't advocate for my community, then who will? Right. And so that was the onus for me getting involved in the immigrant rights movement. And I felt the anti-Blackness from the earliest days, right? My very first like speaking engagement, if you will, was at a UC conference. And I remember having this panel conversation. Mind you, it wasn't even a part of the agenda. Us as Black women, Black immigrant women, had to force our way to create a space to engage on the intersections of Blackness and immigration, because otherwise there was no agenda item for that. And I remember immediately after the conversation was over, one of the other students, I don't know what university they came from, they asked, well, where do Black immigrants even come from? And I was just like, really? Black immigrants come from everywhere and actually come from the same places that you come from, because Afro Latinx immigrants do exist, right? But the idea that, people couldn't grapple with where are Black immigrants even coming from. That was my first experience with blatant anti-Blackness. Not to say that I haven't felt it, experienced it prior, but that was it. That was the catalyst. And I remember, continuously when there would be, positions taken for immigrant rights and for bills and legislation, that Black immigrants would always be left out. That whenever there would be closed door conversations, because you remember that's how they used to do it back in the day, where the organizations at the very top would be invited into these spaces, and anybody who did not have a seat at the table was just forgotten or left out. And continuously you saw the Haitian TPS recipients being on the chopping block, right? You saw DED recipients being on the chopping block, and Black immigrants as a whole suffered, but suffered in silence. And for me, that was like, I can't do this anymore, right? I went more than a decade without sharing my lived experience. I lived in silence, right? I was fearful of what it would mean to share the intersections of my identity. And so I didn't until UCLA. And I really started to see the power, right, of what telling people, look, we do exist. Like, I'm here. I'm not speaking on behalf of every Black immigrant, but I can tell you that we exist. We're impacted by immigration in this country, or the lack thereof of legal processes for immigration. And we're here to stay. And we're here to ensure that we're represented in the mainstream immigrant narrative, in the closed door conversations, and in the hearts and minds of everybody who's fighting for immigrants in this country.
And I love that. And I, as an immigrant and former undocumented DACA recipient as well, I just want to thank you for all the work that you've been doing, and really to merge these communities. And I think that's really at the intersections of all these movements is where Black and Brown solidarity really continues and begins. And so thank you for all the work that you've been doing on the immigration end.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Let's get a little bit into, continuing into allyship, right? What does it mean to be an ally from your perspective? Why is it important? And how do we go beyond allyship into taking action for Black Lives Matter?
Whew. Well, first and foremost, I think what is crucial when we talk about being an ally for Black lives is to really stop seeing Black Lives Matter as a threat to Brown or AAPI communities. I think historically, the reason why so much anti Black sentiment has been able to persist is because, unfortunately, right, non-Black people of color tend to buy into this idea that if Black people are to thrive, that it some way, somehow is a disservice to other marginalized communities. But the reality is, right, when we think about liberation and liberatory practice, there is no freedom or liberation without the liberation of the most marginalized and maligned amongst us. And due, right, to this country's original sin, right, that means grappling with the wrongs that was done to my ancestors and the descendants of Black people who were stolen from the African continent. So there is no us versus them, right? That as people of color, we have to look at our liberation as being bound to one another, right? And so when we talk about Black Lives Matter, I've often hear people say, oh, Black Lives Matter, but, right? And there is no but. When you say Black Lives Matter, that should be without stipulation, right? That should be without calling into question the actions that are taken by organizers. And most importantly, that should mean coming to terms with understanding that no one person speaks on behalf of every Black person. And as a result, no action of one person is reflective of the entire Black community, right? I think during this summer, Stephanie, as you mentioned earlier, right, we've been seeing a civil rights uprising, not just in the United States, but across the globe. Yeah. And it is no coincidence, right? Black Lives Matter and the movement for Black lives was founded years before this even began. And it's about folks understanding that we can't buy into the divisive rhetoric that is being perpetuated by media oftentimes, right? That classifies the movement for Black lives as criminal or negligent or looters. You know, this summer I saw a lot of things coming from Telemundo and Univision and non-Black media as a whole about, oh, like, yeah, we support Black lives, but why is it that you all are looting? As though every Black person is a criminal, right? And every protester fighting against police brutality and state-sanctioned violence should automatically be deemed as negligent, right? And I think it's just about us being active allies, putting our money right where our mouth is. If you call yourself an ally and maybe you don't want to be on the street where these protests and marches and rallies are taking place, then are you given to Black trans folks? Right? Are you given to Black immigrant organizations? Are you being intentional about where your resources are going? And most importantly, are you supporting the efforts and lending your gifts and talents, right, to the movement? Because you don't have to be on the ground, but you should be able to be active enough that you recognize this uprising as the cookout. Everybody wants to be invited to the cookout. Well, look, the cookout is what we're witnessing, right, with these civil rights uprising. And it's about being liable for your actions and for the actions of your friends and families, right? That it shouldn't be, oh, I'm not a racist, right? And that's enough, right? For a lot of people, it's like, I'm colorblind. First of all, there's no such thing, right? Let's understand that when you say colorblind, it's actually very problematic in that it erases the experience of Black, Brown, AAPI, Indigenous folks who do have to live complex lives and continue to live complex lives simply as a result of the colors of our skin, right? And so being active to call out anti-Blackness and colorism when you see it and hear it, right? And not just leaving it for the next person, assuming that your comments or that your conversations won't make a difference with your family.
Mhm.
especially like you said, as we enter into the holiday season.
Yeah, yeah. And Denea, I really love that emphasis of interconnectedness that you spoke of. I think as an ally, I consider myself an ally to many different movements, right? And I think it's because we are, as a society, as a community, wherever it is that you live, we are so interconnected. And it's true. Like, you're not liberated until everyone else is liberated, and we need to be able to speak out for the most vulnerable, and there's pockets of most vulnerable everywhere, right? And so I really appreciate that, just emphasis on being able to step up when needed, all the, at all times, not just when it's trend worthy.
Right.
So many of us feel very motivated to take these issues and want to know how we can bring them home to our families and communities. Again, as we are coming close to the holidays, many of us will be having our Zoom festivities for Thanksgiving. How do we confront anti-Blackness in the Latinx community? And this is, of course, from your own perspective. As we're heading into the holiday season and spend more time with family, friends, especially when race and also politics is at the top of our minds right now.
Ooh, that's the $1,000,000 question, right? And it's something that I even have to engage with my own friends and family, right? More so my family. My friends, I could choose them. And I'm not choosing the racists and the xenophobes. I'm not. I most recently saw this post on Twitter where someone said, oh, like, y'all are cutting off people simply because they voted, for another person, right? And I'm like, heck yes, we are, right? That's what it means. That when we say that we're living this truth and we're being anti-racist, if you've ever read Ibram Kendi, right? Ibram Kendi, who wrote the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, then you will understand that the onus of how to be an anti-racist is about a collective responsibility, right? And seeing our own day-to-day stakeholdership in doing this work and being anti-racist. And beyond that, it's about a recognition that there are some things, there are some actions by us as individuals that leads to the perpetuation of racism, even though we might not recognize it as such, right? But if you think about it, people think oftentimes within our society that it's sufficient just to be neutral, right? And so you often hear people say, like, oh no, like I want to be peaceful. I don't want to engage in something that's going to create conflict within my family. But imagine how Black America is feeling, or Black people are feeling, right? When your family member who you felt simply uncomfortable to engage with lashes out at the grocery store. We've seen countless people being Karens, and it's not just white women that are Karens, right? Every community has its Karens, and it's important that we check those actions when we see it. When we see our family members saying things like, oh, they're so bad, or, they, like that ever present they, right? In which that person might be referencing the action of one person, as I said earlier, but conflated with this idea of criminality for the entirety of the Black community. Check those things at the door. Most importantly, one of my most, I would say, beautiful moments in the immigrant rights movement was when we had a shared conference between the Black and AAPI community. And, it was a press conference, and for some reason they sent out like the congressional police, right, with their bomb sniffing dogs. And the woman who was representing the AAPI organization, she said, wait a minute, we had been coming here and doing these press conferences for weeks on end leading up to this. The sole difference between those weeks prior and today, this is what she said, her words, not mine, is because we were with Black people.
Wow.
Right? And the fact that as an ally, an active ally, she was able to, one, recognize it. she was able to call it out, call it by its rightful name, right? And say exactly what it was, even though it might have made maybe some of the older members in her community uncomfortable, or made, you know, the members of Congress who were present uncomfortable, but she said it and she did it. And most importantly, it's a matter of being able to be willing to put yourself on the line to do so. Right? Are you really an ally when someone is being attacked? And it's not just, right? I think this is the problem that we face as a society, where because we've lived under racism and white supremacy for so long, there's this idea that racism and anti-Blackness is only in certain words and certain actions, right? That it must be someone being lynched, or it must be someone being called the N-word, or very blatant things, right? That we know are clearly wrong and inhumane. But it's often the microaggressions too that are racist and that are anti-Black, right? And those are some things too that are happening day to day, if not hour by hour. And because we see it as microaggressions and not those blatant things, we tend to just shrug it off and be like, oh, maybe they meant, maybe, right? Like, who are we really? Are we in allyship with a person who's being anti-Black, being xenophobic, being bigoted? Or are we standing in line with members of the Black community and marginalized communities that have been historically underrepresented and misrepresented, right? Who are we, and how are we showing up for the communities that need us? And that's something that I think comes with the practice of being anti-racist. It's a day-to-day challenge, right? And it's about understanding. And I think we had a conversation about this while preparing for this conversation. It's about recognizing that even though we may make those donations, right? And even though we may have those t-shirts that say Black Lives Matter, that it's not just about the performative aspect. It's about what are we doing to shift our minds, right? To shift the minds of our families and friends, and how we're really showing up every day. And there is no such thing as achieving anti-racism in the course of one conversation like this one, or over the course of months or years. It is a lifelong process. You won't ever perfect it so long as racism and white supremacy, right, and the lack of recognition of the original sin exists in this country. It's just not a thing.
I really like that. Thank you, Denea. Yeah, I agree. I think that, I mean, when I hear you say that, I feel like this was almost a call to anyone that wasn't being affected by everything that wasn't going on. Then it was a call to action to realign with your values, right? It's like, this is what you're reassessing, like, what do we stand for? I'm really happy and proud to say that I really love working for an organization that did go through that reckoning and kind of self-reassessment. I think soon after in the summer, we had conversations. I think everyone on the team was affected differently, right? Because there's also that cross identity in the Latino, Latinx community. And as Latinas, we were all impacted very differently. We did engage. We began reading the Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist book. And I think that was so, we took it as part of our meetings. Like, how did we read this? How did we read this chapter? How do we incorporate this not only in our day-to-day lives, but also in the work that we're doing in the Latino community? And so I really appreciate that context of being very intentional about change, right? Because I think we can all be very complicit about falling into these strengths that you mentioned. We do live in a very racial society that was bred that way. And so I appreciate just the intentionality behind that.
Thank you.
So from your perspective and from your opinion, what are some of the negative rhetoric that as in the Latinx community, we should start combating when it comes to racism and anti-Blackness?
first and foremost, colorism is real, right? I'm from Belize, as you mentioned in the introduction that you gave me, and colorism is real even there, right? Where there's this idea of Black features and Black features not being beautiful and not being accepted simply because you're of a darker complexion. But there's also this, my family does this same thing where it's like, oh, we saw in the media, right? Like this happened, and those people, right? Like, and I'm like, whoa, I have some work to do even here. That we really do have to do that work as a family together. But some of the rhetoric that I've seen most recently, right, around like Vanessa Guillen, right, which that story just broke my heart over and over and over again, especially as details came to the forefront. And also what I've been seeing with the vendors that have been attacked, right? Those are some of the most recent examples that I've seen where people have really utilized those stories, those heinous stories, right? As justification for anti-Blackness, right? In order to say things like, oh, those people, or just to use that as an excuse to say that Black criminality some way somehow exists. And if you know anything about this idea of Black criminality and how it came to be, it was utilized, right, during Jim Crow segregation as justification for the lynching of Black people, right? And to establish this notion that all Black people are some way, somehow born to do evil, right? And so when I hear things like that, I even, in wake of one of the vendors being attacked, I saw someone that I had considered to be a friend from UCLA actually say, Black people get your people. And I just, I couldn't believe it.
Wow.
This had been an individual who I'd engaged with so many times. She considered herself to be Afro-Latinx, had participated in the Black Lives Matter movement, all of these things, right? And I think that takes us to the earlier point in which you could check all of the progressive and woke boxes, right? Oh, been to the rally, like I've chanted, I got my t-shirts, I've donated to Black Lives Matter and the Black Women's Bail Fund and all of these things, right? And it's to still understand, right, that you've never fully made it to this point of unlearning
Yeah.
your own anti-Blackness. And that's not even just anti-Blackness, that's blatant racism, to feel as though the actions of a single person is indicative of everybody else's, right? And so it's about cutting off those relationships if you feel as though they won't pan out, right? Stop making excuses for the individual who you've seen continually be anti-Black and racist. And I know that's difficult in the context of family, but I've done it, right? Because it's like, are we going to continue to put ourselves in a position where, yes, you could do the educating, but educating is labor, it's laborious, right? And emotionally taxing to be explaining to people why you feel as though your life matters.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's exhausting to me as a Black immigrant woman, right, then only imagine, the privilege that you might have in having these conversations with your family to stop those anti-Black encounters, right? And to really hold them accountable for their actions and to not excuse it, but to call it out as soon as you hear it, and to stop second guessing whether or not that person really meant what they said. They said it. Why would there still be a lingering question, right? And it's about seeing these things and challenging the notions that we've long had to be true, felt to be true,
Yeah.
right? Um, and then engaging in conversations like this one, where it's not just about a statement. You all took it one step further and created a whole series, right? I think that's a call to action for organizations that do this work, right? Organizations that serve numerous people at the intersections of different identities, where even though you all identify as Latinas, that there's an intersection even within that Latina identity, right? And really coming to terms with what that means for how you see the movement and how you see the actions that are being done on the ground, right? And so just continuing conversations like this one, and not just taking my word for it, but doing your own research and having the due diligence to say, I don't understand that, right? How can I engage and understand this better, right? And asking those questions and not always feeling as though the onus of this work is on the shoulders of those who are already impacted.
Yeah, yeah. So important, Denea, and on a personal level, and I think I can speak for Hope as a community organization. We are so committed to continuing this work and to really integrating this as a continual anti-racist work in our actions towards our community and in our daily lives as professional women. Denea, thank you so much for this conversation. We're almost at time, but I just wanted to, any parting words to our network of Hope Latinas. This is a network of as young as high school students, college students, professionals that have engaged in our trainings and our community programs that are hopefully tuning in right now. Any parting words?
Well, I'd rather leave you with some words from James Baldwin. And one of my favorite quotes from James Baldwin is in regard to when Angela Davis was incarcerated and the letter that he wrote to her. And he basically says, if they come for me in the morning, they will be coming for you that night, right? And the significance of that is this idea that even though you're the one incarcerated and I'm out free, right? Whatever that may mean, that it doesn't mean that it's impossible for me to be exactly where you are later on, right? That it's about shared action and accountability and not seeing one another as a threat to the viability of the other or the other community, but really looking at how we can be better at working together, because technically, though we are considered to be the minority, we are the majority. And imagine if we were to recognize that the things that have taken place to one has really been done to every marginalized group in this country, would make a world of difference, right? In regards to our organizing and in regards to how we look at each other. I don't think we see enough of our collective humanity, right? And if we were only to do that, imagine the power and the shared resources and the viability, right? And the ingenuity of being able to create new systems that don't currently exist, right? Let's just be imaginative and shoot for the stars, really, as far as what we're able to do collectively.
Denea, you're leaving us with good inspiration. I love that. Collective power, collective wisdom. I think it's where it's at. And I think that's what's going to be moving us forward in the next decade and the next generation of us as a society. So thank you so much, Denea. Thank you for your insight, for your perspective, and for everything that you're doing on the ground to advance racial justice in our communities. So thank you so much for just being with us today. I'm sure that we're all seeing the love on Facebook right now. So Denea, thanks for joining us. Thank you to our sponsors, Walmart, for the grant to make this programming possible. And for our audience who's tuning in, please stay safe during this holiday. Wear your masks, stay social distance. Let's also work together to really stop the spread of this virus. We hope to see you all next week. We're having our 31st anniversary award celebration on December 3rd. You can purchase tickets and join us online. Check out all the information on latinas.org. Thank you again, Denea. Have a lovely week and happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Stephanie. Have a good one.
Okay, bye-bye.